Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about Joe Johnston and Maurice Hunt's film, The Pagemaster. So, this is one of those great 90s films where they were just like, anybody who's famous in Hollywood, just stick them in this movie. So our protagonist, Richard Tyler, is played by Macaulay Culkin. We've got Ed Begley Jr. as his father. We've got voiceovers by Leonard Nimoy, Whoopi Goldberg, Patrick Stewart. We've got a ton of big names. The librarian in the live-action portion and the Pagemaster in the cartoon version is done by Christopher Lloyd. So we've just got one of those great star-studded casts that they loved doing in the 90s. It was a simpler time. Also, it was apparently a simpler time because Ed Begley Jr. gives Macaulay Culkin $5 to go buy a pound of nails. So clearly things were a lot cheaper back then. But anyway, that's not the point. So basically, this is a blended live action and animated film about the coming of age of Richard Tyler, played by Macaulay Culkin. Richard is an extremely nervous child. Like, super, super nervous. Like, he does not do things. Like, he has a no smoking sign on the wall of his room because he's concerned about people smoking in his room, even though he's a kid, and as far as we can tell, neither of his parents smoke. He's got just all of his stuff is labeled with warning signs. When his dad, Ed Begley Jr., is building him a treehouse in the early portion of the film, Richard refuses to climb up it because he knows the statistics on accidents involving ladders and trees, which comes out to something like 11% combined. So statistically, he could climb up into that tree house 9 times and be safe, and the 10th time he'd be done for. But regardless of that, this is a kid who, like, he is super, super timid. He is a caricature of timidity. His dad sends him to buy some nails to build this tree house that Richard doesn't even want. Richard goes out on his bike, which has a weird, like, front shield with a bunch of lights, and he's got a safety reflector vest and all kinds of stuff on his bike for safety. He sees a bunch of other kids who are jumping their bikes over a ramp at a construction site, and they're like, haha, you're scared, you suck, and he rides off. Then he gets caught in a storm, and he goes into this very, very, very nice library. Like, gigantic, like, this is like New York Metropolitan Library type size. Which seems to just sort of be out kind of in the middle of nowhere near this suburban town where he lives. In the library, he meets Mr. Dewey. I see what you did there, people who wrote this movie. Mr. Dewey, the librarian. That's a reference to the Dewey Decimal System, for those of you who didn't get that. Played by Christopher Lloyd. And Mr. Dewey is like, I know what kind of book you want. You want a fantasy book. No, you want an adventure book. No, you want horror. Ooh. And Richard's like, no, I don't want any books. I just want to go call my parents. And Mr. Dewey's like, fine. Well, here's a library card. The phone is off that way. Go down that way, then turn left. You'll get to the rotunda. Actually, he says turn west, I think. You'll get to the rotunda, then the phone's there. So that's all happening. Richard gets to the rotunda, this giant mural on the ceiling, previewing what he's going to experience. We've got paintings of the Pagemaster in the center. Then we've got Jekyll and Hyde. We've got Moby Dick, we've got Treasure Island, and we've got sort of general fantasy, maybe specifically like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty, something like, or not Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, I think. Giant dragon, fire blasting a knight's shield, etc., etc. The paint. So Richard trips, falls, and presumably bangs his head, concussion style, maybe. The paint starts falling from the ceiling, and everything turns animated. And he's in an animated library. He has to try and get out, try and get to the exit. Along the way, he picks up 3 book companions. We've got Adventure, who is a pirate novel. We've got Fantasy, who is a sort of fairy godmother type novel. And we've got Horror, who's sort of a deformed monster kind of character. They help Richard on his adventures through these different stories. He has to make his way through the stories. Jekyll and Hyde, Moby Dick, Treasure Island. I'm just going to call it Sleeping Beauty because that's sort of the fantasy one that I think is closest to it. So he needs to make his way through these stories in order to get to the exit of the library. And he's finally able to do so, at which point the Pagemaster is there, and Richard is all pissed off that the Pagemaster could just show up at the exit, whereas Richard had to go through all of these trials, all of these challenges in these stories. And the Pagemaster says, yes, but if I had just brought you here to the end, you wouldn't have grown. You wouldn't have faced your fears. And then basically Richard is allowed to go back to the real world. Mr. Dewey, the librarian, finds him as he's waking up. There's the 3 books around him, adventure, fantasy, and horror. And Richard tells Mr. Dewey, I want to check these books out. Mr. Dewey's like, you can only take out 2 at a time. And then Richard's like, but I promised them I'd take them all. And Mr. Dewey's like, fine, just this once. And then he just lets him go. Like, there's no, like, I'm recording who you are and what books you've taken or anything like that. He's literally just like, all right, whatever, take these books. Best of luck to you. And so Richard rides away. He jumps his bike over the ramp that the kids who were mean to him earlier were jumping. Then his parents get home after searching for him all afternoon, and he's up sleeping in the treehouse with his 3 books. And Mom takes his glasses, which is not a good thing. Don't take somebody else's glasses while they're sleeping. But so let's think about this for a second. I actually quite like the movie. I think it's a nice coming of age story. It's a nice facing your fears story. And as a book person who in fact runs a book-oriented YouTube channel, as well as being an English teacher, I very much like the endorsement of literature as a method or a basis for personal growth. I'm 100% on board with that. I don't necessarily like the ending of the adventure. When Richard gets to the exit and the Pagemaster is there and he says, oh, you've gotten to face your fears, which you wouldn't have done if I just magicked you to the exit. Yes, that's true, but we don't need it. I actually think it takes away from the quality of the film to overtly spell out for the audience. And I get that this is a kids' movie, and kids are not necessarily smart or insightful or whatever it is. I get that. But I think it takes away from the quality of this movie to, at the end, say, oh, look, here's what you were supposed to have seen from this story. Like, the personal growth is pretty evident. Like, the last thing that Richard does before he gets to the exit, the 3 books are cornered by the dragon, and Richard goes back to save them. Like, he picks up the helmet, sword, and shield of a dead knight, a skeletal knight, and he goes down to fight this dragon. This is a kid who, at the beginning of the movie, was like, I can't climb this 7-rung ladder up to this tree house because there's an 11% chance there might be some accident. This kid is going after a dragon with a sword, a shield, and a helmet. This is clearly someone who has experienced personal growth. And then, of course, we follow that up once he gets back to live action by him jumping his bike over this ramp that he was earlier afraid to, and then going up and falling asleep in the treehouse. We don't need the Pagemaster to say, you have experienced personal growth. I think, maybe it's not a huge thing, but I think it actually does take away from the strength of the movie. If we had just been left to come to that conclusion, to, as viewers, realize that that was what was going on and that's what we were seeing, I think it would have been stronger.